Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I am Billy and I'm joined by my co-host
Andrew. Bill's back again for another podcast. Good to be back here and back in the office as well.
Absolutely, it is good to be back in the office. And Andrew got a cracking episode today that I think is really relevant and hopefully generates a whole heap of value for everybody.
Yeah, it seems to be something that everyone's talking about, and I mean, look, there's never a shortage of people that are talking about this point, but it's especially prevalent in current times. So tell us, Bills, what are we talking about today?
It's the first thing. Well, I was going to say it's the first thing that first time we have to worry about this in a long time. But today we're talking about a recession, and well, in particular, what is a recession? That's the first thing, and we'll get that one out the way fairly easily because I think that's pretty straightforward. But more importantly, how can we prepare for it? And what are some practical tips that our listeners can take away and implement? So if we do go into a recession, because it's potentially on the cards, but we're not there, what's some of the things that they can do in order to help navigate through it with as little as financial pain as we possibly can?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first point in call is really to talk about what is a recession before we start talking about, some tips and some ideas of how you can navigate your way either through it or prepare for it beforehand, which is obviously the ideal state. But really, I mean, the technical term for a recession that most people will use is 2 periods or 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. So what we're talking about is 2 periods of economic activity back to back that are both negative will constitute a recession. And really that's the technical definition for it, but it's prolonged negative investment, or it's prolonged negative investment markets throughout a period of time is really what it is. And it's generally something that's, prolonged in nature and not short-term in nature and whatnot.
Yeah. And I guess when you think about that across the board, if you're getting negative GDP growth, it means that there's stuff, because GDP, gross domestic product, is a reflection of how much economic activity is happening. And if you consider it from that perspective, it means that the economy is slowing down. Businesses are making less money. People are earning less money. People are buying less stuff. It's just less activity going on. So you'd think about it in that term. So take it from a really small level in terms of what's happening from a household perspective, and then expand that over an economy. And it means that things are slowing down.
Yeah.
Basically, that's a really easy way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And I guess the first, key takeaway when you're, trying to plan for this and when you're trying to, secure your financial future, and it should be in any market circumstance, but especially prevalent and especially important in periods of negative growth, is your cash flow and your budget. If your cash flow and your budget's out of whack, if you've got a negative cash flow position, if you're not saving as much as you should be, if you're not putting away funds to, investment or emergency funds or whatever it is that we'll, talk through today, if there's holes in your budget, then a recession is only going to exacerbate that issue. Yep. And so making sure that that's tight and making sure that your personal cash flow and budgeting strategy is really solid is the key in any market, and especially important in a market of negative growth.
Yeah. Yep. We've spoken about the budget and the cash flow position, banking structures, bucketing structures, time and time again. And for us, that's kind of 101 starting position from a wealth creation and a financial advising conversation. You're right. In that market, it becomes absolutely necessary to be on top of that. Because if you're not, it's really difficult to know your position.
Yeah.
And then adjust accordingly when things do go differently. It could be that you're earning, if you're on a commission-based structure, or if you work overtime, if things are slowing down, maybe it means a decrease in income. So what does that mean for your budget? How does that then impact the rest of your household and your life? So absolutely, Andrew, agree with that. Making sure that you've got that covered in preparation for that, so you can identify and adjust accordingly and then pivot quickly. Absolutely key.
And the other thing that's going to have is if you've got a bucketing strategy, if you've got, a cash flow strategy where you know what's coming in and what's coming out, you can quickly identify when there's going to be an issue. So you're ahead of the curve as opposed to waiting until you're, moving into a, negative savings position and going into consumer debt and all of that stuff. If you're monitoring and tracking your cash flow, you see that happening early and you adjust your expenditure accordingly early as opposed to waiting until the very end.
Yep. Second part of the process, and one of the things that's theoretically easy enough to do and logical enough to do, is having an emergency fund. We talk about that with our cash flow and banking strategies anyway, just because it makes the operation of the strategy a bit easier. But the bigger the buffer and the bigger the safety net that you've got, theoretically, the more that you can absorb, shocks to your household cash flow to be able to get you through periods of difficult times.
Yeah. I mean, look, logical, and I probably don't think that we need to speak too much about it. Yeah. Emergency fund, key, has to be there, should be a part of absolutely every strategy, every bucketing strategy, every cash flow strategy. Another really interesting point, which seems to be the antithesis of what most people do during this, and it is a lot easier said than done. Panic selling. That's a massive no-no. That's something that happens all too often. When investment markets are declining, when things are going down, when things are not looking so rosy, everyone thinks that, it's the end of the world, and all of a sudden everyone's, selling all of their assets at depleted prices. But panic selling is a massive no-no in a recession, and making sure that so long as you can and so long as it's affordable, hold your position if you're still invested in good quality assets, and know that it's only short term and, things will come back. That's really one massive key takeaway in all of this.
Yeah, and I guess it's an understandable reaction. Yeah. Right. Obviously, the environment around you, whether it's the direct environment being your work, is deteriorating, or you see it on the news that things are changing. You look at your investments or you look at your net worth position and you want to defend that. So you think, okay, let's get out as the natural sort of reaction and the natural instinct. The majority of the time, that's the wrong decision to make. Yeah. Staying the course, sticking to the original investment strategy, and that's part of, I guess, having an investment strategy and the education piece that should come with that when we're talking to people around, hey, we are going to experience this. And one of the terms that I've been using of late, and one of the phrases is, you can't just play the game when the sun is shining. Like, it's not, you can't just be an investor when we're in a bull market.
Yeah.
It just, by its very nature, it just does not work like that. So you have to be realistic about it, and not panic selling. And that's one of the benefits. Let's fly our own flag here for a sec, but that's one of the benefits of having a financial advisor, because if you are going to make those, sporadic decisions, highly emotionally driven at a time when pressure is high, you've got someone in your corner that you can bounce that idea off, and hopefully they can talk through the pros and the cons associated with that and help you make the right decision for your circumstances.
Yeah. So having an unbiased person to be able to give a viewpoint that's not based on emotion, but rather based on something that's far more tangible is very important. But yeah, absolutely. You want to roll with the punches in that time. And it is important, to make sure that you're still invested in assets that are of good quality, and that can change depending on the market circumstances. So not saying, hold on to absolutely everything. There are going to be some investments that you're going to want to sell out of at certain points in time, depending on market circumstances. But making sure that you stay the course and making sure that you look at things from a long-term perspective rather than just the short-term pain that you're experiencing is one of the really key things when you're looking at, dealing with your investments in the eye of the storm, so to speak.
Andrew, that's a really good conduit, because one of the things that we talk to people about all of the time with this is, yes, it's difficult. And if you're in the right position and you've got, I guess, the resolve, so the risk profile, security of income, you got your budgeting strategy in place, your cash flow strategy, it actually represents a really good opportunity. So I reckon we should talk about the opportunity here, because that's really, I think, the wealth creation accelerator that you have is when markets are down.
Yeah. We've seen it work time and time again. And I feel like every time we go through market circumstances when things are not going so well, everyone thinks that this is different. This is not the same as, every other market crash, and things are not going to come back and all of that stuff. And the people that have the resolve to say, hey, this is a really good buying opportunity. This is an opportunity to purchase assets at a discounted price. I mean, you think about, what was happening with COVID a few years ago, and the people that recognize that, hey, this is something that's temporary in nature. This is something that's impacting the markets at the moment. There were people that purchased stocks in Flight Centre, for instance, recognizing that, hey, things will go back to normal at some point, and experienced a fairly rapid, growth in assets like that. It's a time of opportunity if you've got the right structure and strategy in place, because we've also seen the flip side whereby people say, hey, great opportunity, put all of their eggs in one basket. It doesn't materialize quick enough, and all of a sudden they're needing to sell assets in order to be able to fund their, or put food on the table, pay their bills, all of that stuff. And so you also want to do it in a measured, conservative and long-term approach, and know that what you're doing is, forming part of the overall strategy, but absolutely represents a very solid buying opportunity and very solid opportunity to purchase assets that are usually going to cost here and are now down here, but that will return to normal at some point in time in the future.
Yeah, so really driving this point home around how do we prepare for it? It's not necessarily how do we prepare for it on the defensive side. I think we covered some of those things before, but this is actually how do we prepare for it on the offensive, and where do we need to get ourselves into in order to take advantage of this when it does happen, if that's the right decision for us and our circumstances at that point in time. And one of the things that we talk to people about is, investing regularly, dollar cost averaging, making sure that you're getting the moving average of whatever the underlying investments are, but also having the amount of money on the side. So when markets do take a hit, whether it's a correction, whatever it may be, you're in a position to actually put in a larger amount rather than just your regular amount, to take advantage of the market being down. Yeah. And then, using that as an opportunity to try and, on the flip side, when it does recover, using that to accelerate your wealth creation. So driving this point home, it's, hey, changing our mindset from defensive, if you're in the right position and the right circumstances, to how do I take advantage of this and how do I play offense with it?
Yeah, exactly right. So having the cash reserves to be able to take advantage of market opportunities. And you touched on a really interesting and very important point, dollar cost averaging. So essentially what dollar cost averaging is investing on a regular basis and investing the same amount on a regular basis in order to smooth out the asset price. So if assets are increasing in value, then you're riding that wave up. If assets are decreasing in value, then you're purchasing assets at discounted prices. So a portion of your strategy should be, we're going to dollar cost average, and we're going to make sure that we're buying irrespective of market circumstances and averaging out the buy price. And a portion of your strategy is, hey, let's keep some cash reserves so that we can take advantage of, not only a recession, because that might happen, once every few years, but also, a specific investment that has experienced something that's temporary in nature. Price of it has dropped, and you can jump into that specific investment. So having a cash buffer or a cash amount on the side that you can jump into, whether it's a recession or a specific investment opportunity as well, while still taking advantage of dollar cost averaging and utilizing that benefit. So really, really key and great point there as well.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's important to note and point out too is getting realistic around the timing with this, because you're not going to be able to necessarily pick the bottom. Yeah. So you need to be realistic around, hey, this is what we're deciding to do. We're going to buy into the market with a lump sum amount of money that we've got sitting on the side because markets are down, because that particular asset class represents good value. Yeah. So from that perspective, we just need to be realistic that you're not going to pick the bottom, and the inverse is true too, that you're not going to be able to pick the top when you decide to sell as well. So from that point of view, just be realistic that as long as you're in that vicinity and you're doing those things, realistic approach around that. It's long-term investing. It's not picking the bottom. just having a realistic realistic mindset, I think is really critical and really important when it comes to this, because you don't want to make a decision, commit a larger amount of money, and then kick yourself and go, oh, I should have waited. Because the truth is, it's luck. You can't time the market. We don't know.
Absolutely. And I think that's, I've seen it happen a few times before where, you've got the cash buffer on the side, you've done all of the right things, you've prepped for it, but an investor's sitting there and waiting for the very bottom of the market, and they're waiting and waiting and waiting, and things are going to get even worse. I'm going to have an even better opportunity to purchase assets at a discount, and things are going to be even more opportune, and all of a sudden the market's gone back up, it's recovered, the recession is long forgotten, and you've missed out on that opportunity. So sometimes one in the hand is better than two in the sky. So making sure that you're taking advantage of the opportunity that's presented in front of you and grabbing that, as opposed to, waiting for really trying to pick that bottom of the market is the approach that you should be taking, and should be taking advantage of the opportunity that's ultimately presented.
100%. Not overcommitting. Yeah. Really critical. And I think it's easy enough for us to say, because when we're thinking about this, it's like, okay, we've got the fundamentals in place with the overarching strategy. We've got our cash flow strategy. We've got, insurances in place. There's secure income. There's redraw or money sitting in offset or whatever it is. Thinking about that and saying, don't overcommit, right? So you want to be in a position where you can take advantage of this opportunity without actually going too far and overcommitting and then potentially leaving yourself short.
Yeah. And this is on both fronts, right? So this is, don't overcommit when you're trying to take advantage of a market opportunity. But on the flip side, don't overcommit on a regular basis when you're investing before a recession or anything happens, making sure that what you're doing is sustainable for the long term, and making sure that what you're doing is not only going to be right for today, but also going to be right for, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years away, so that you're not forced in a position whereby you've overcommitted and you don't have any other option. Your money's invested, you've had a drop in income, and all of a sudden you have to sell your assets in order to be able to fund your lifestyle expenses and pay your bills. All of a sudden, you know that the decision that you're making is wrong. You know that it's the decision that you shouldn't be making, but the option is, don't eat or sell, not to that dire extent, but you're forced into a position to do something that is not the right thing to be doing. So not overcommitting is a key in all of this as well.
I think when it comes back to investing in portfolios in particular, sort of that mindset piece, and it's hard. Like, I've been in this position, a handful of times, we all have, but going back to the fundamental investment strategy, and the majority of the time, investments are long-term in nature. Yeah. So needing to keep that at the forefront of your thinking, and once again, thinking this time is different. This time is different because of A, B, C, and D. Like, yes, I get it, but you can't bet against humanity, right? People are always, I think, going to try and do better for themselves and their family than the previous generation. As a society, we advance, so you'd think that would relate to GDP growth across the world. Yeah. So if you take that mindset, longer term investing, it's not different this time. It's another cycle. There obviously are differences, but you can't bet against humanity in my particular mind. Keeping a long-term time frame and not chasing particular trends. You may be able to make some quick bucks if you identify it, get in and get out. But once again, I think that's a form of gambling. It's not investing.
Yeah. So really, when you're looking at your investment strategy, whether it's in the midst of a market downturn, or whether it's when you're preparing for it beforehand, have that long-term mindset in mind. Have that end goal. Have that overarching strategy of what you're doing, why you're doing, and it gives you purpose, really. I mean, the amount of times that we've sat in front of clients and they've said, I'm concerned about the investment market, I want to sell down, I'm having or reading all of this information in the media, and when you take it back and say, hey, what we're doing is trying to build wealth for the next 15 years, is your expectation that in 15 years time, when we do eventually sell out of this portfolio, it's going to be less than what it is now because of what's happening now? And most of the time, once you take it back to, the long-term mind frame and the long-term strategy of what you're doing, it's like, okay, yep, that makes sense. Yep. we're not investing for now. We're not investing to make $1 now so that we can sell in, a year's time. We're investing for the long term. Most of the time you start to make more rational decisions with your investments as well.
Yeah, no, look, once again, we always advocate for advice. It's having that advisor to be able to bounce that off, to be able to set you up. And probably in closing, the other thing that comes to mind for me with this is, I'll say the majority of the time that an economy goes into recession, I might shoot myself in the foot here, but it doesn't happen quickly. It may happen quickly if there's a particular event. Yeah. A war breaks out, a 9/11 style event, those sorts of things. But I guess in this instance, what we're going through at the moment, it's coming. Hopefully we don't get there. Hopefully the regulators and the central banks can navigate us through this. But most of the time, I'd say you've got time to prepare for it. So if that's the case, the real question that I've got is, what are the things that we can be doing now? We covered off on them, but we should have time to prepare ourselves. A little bit more challenging at this point in time because there's obviously increasing interest rates as well. And in particular in Australia, we're a heavily indebted country and society with our mortgages. So there's a little bit of an issue in terms of navigating that. But once again, you've got time. What are the things that we can be doing now in order to prepare ourselves to get ourselves through that? Because what other choice have we got? But how do we get ourselves through that with as little as pain and heartache as possible?
Yeah, and I find a lot of the times, a lot of it is mental. As long as you can fight the mental battle of, sticking to your guns and, employing all of the right tactics and strategy, that's 90% of the battle. In instances where, you have to do what you have to do and you need to sell even though it's not the right thing to be doing, that happens. But in my experience, that's few and far between. And a lot of the times, as long as you can fight the mental battle of what's happening, everything else is usually going to be okay.
Turn off the news.
Yeah.
Turn off social media.
Turn down the noise.
Turn down the noise. But keep listening and watching to the 360 Money Matters podcast.
Comes around full circle.
I was waiting for that. Andrew, I reckon that's about it from us in relation to recession and what we can do on the defensive side and the offensive side to position ourselves to make sure that we can get through it okay.
Yeah, Bills, thank you again for another great podcast, and thanks to our listeners and viewers for tuning in to another episode, and look forward to catching you on the next one.
Thank you. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we've talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorized representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.